Prepare yourself for a story that hits harder than a left hook in the final round. A narrative that proves that the strongest heart isn't the one that can endure pain in the ring, but the one that can heal the pain of others outside of it. You know Manny Pacquiao as the 8-division world champion, a living legend of boxing, a man who danced around opponents with lightning speed and thunderous power. But today, we are not stepping into the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. We are stepping into the humble, private world of a man who never forgot the taste of hunger. We are going to uncover the moment when Manny Pacquiao gave a car to his housemaid, a simple gesture that shattered the boundaries between employer and employee and revealed the true soul of a champion. This is the story of a woman who spent her life serving others, invisible to the world, until the day she was seen by a hero. This is the saga of tears, disbelief, and a life changed in the blink of an eye. Feel the emotion, the struggle, and the incredible power of generosity that proves that true wealth is not what you keep, but what you give away. To understand the magnitude of this moment, we must first transport ourselves to the Philippines, a nation of breathtaking beauty but also of crushing poverty. Before he was a global icon, before the millions of dollars and the pay-per-view records, Manny Pacquiao was a starving boy sleeping on cardboard boxes in the streets of General Santos City. He sold donuts and bread just to survive. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be looked down upon, to have nothing but a dream and an empty stomach. This trauma of poverty never left him. Even as he ascended to the Olympus of sports, becoming a senator and a billionaire, the ghost of his past walked beside him, whispering in his ear, reminding him of the people who were still left behind in the dust. His mansion in General Santos was not just a symbol of his success. It was a fortress of hope, a place where hundreds of people would line up outside the gates every day, asking for food, for medicine, for a miracle. And inside that mansion, working in the shadows, were the people who kept his life running, his staff. Among them was a housemaid, often referred to in reports as Doris, a woman whose life had been a ceaseless marathon of sacrifice. Like millions of Filipino women, she had dedicated her existence to serving others to support her family back in the province. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors and washing clothes. Her back was bent from carrying loads that were too heavy for her small frame. She woke up before the sun rose to ensure the house was spotless, that the champion's breakfast was ready, that his children were cared for. She moved through the opulent hallways of the Pacquiao residence like a ghost, silent and efficient, never complaining, never asking for more than her agreed salary. She watched from the sidelines as Manny lived a life of unimaginable luxury, surrounded by entourages, luxury cars, and glitz. But she never felt envy. She only felt gratitude for having a job that put food on her family's table. She was the definition of humility, a quiet warrior in her own right, fighting a battle against poverty that had no bell to signal the end of the round. However, Manny Pacquiao is not a normal boss. He possesses a gift that many wealthy people lose along the way, the gift of sight. He sees people. He doesn't just see staff. He sees human beings with stories, struggles, and dreams. He watched Doris. He noticed the way she paused to rub her aching back when she thought no one was looking. He saw the way she looked at his fleet of luxury cars, not with greed, but with the distant admiration of someone looking at a star they know they can never touch. He knew that she took public transport, fighting through the chaotic, humid, and dangerous traffic of the Philippines, to run errands or to visit her family on her rare days off. He knew the struggle of commuting in a third-world country, the exhaustion that settles in the bones after hours of standing in a crowded jeepney. Manny saw his own mother in her. He saw the struggle of his own people, and a plan began to form in the champion's heart. It was a regular, scorching hot afternoon in the Philippines. The air was thick with humidity. The household was buzzing with activity. Doris was busy in the kitchen, wiping sweat from her brow, preparing for another long evening of service. She was tired. Her legs ached. She was worrying about expenses, about the future, about the endless cycle of work. She had no idea that her life was about to collide with a blessing so massive it would bring her to her knees. Manny walked into the kitchen. He wasn't wearing his boxing gloves. He was wearing a simple smile that hid a massive surprise. He called her name. "Doris," Manny said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Come with me. I need you to see something outside." Doris froze. Panic flared in her chest. Had she broken something? Was the cleaning not good enough? Was she being fired? In the world of the poor, being called by the boss unexpectedly usually meant bad news. She wiped her hands on her apron, bowed her head respectfully, and followed the champ. Her heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She walked behind him, through the grand living room, past the trophies that gleamed under the chandeliers, and out into the blinding sunlight of the driveway. She expected a reprimand. She expected to be sent home. She never, in her wildest dreams, expected what was waiting for her on the pavement. The walk from the kitchen to the driveway felt like the longest journey of Doris's life. As she stepped out of the cool, air-conditioned sanctuary of the mansion into the oppressive, humid heat of the Philippine afternoon, her mind was a whirlwind of catastrophic thoughts. Every step felt heavier than the last, her rubber slippers making a soft, nervous scuffing sound against the polished marble, and then the rougher pavement. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground or on the back of Manny Pacquiao's shirt. This was the man who had knocked out giants like De La Hoya, Hatton, and Cotto. To the world, he was a god of war, a titan of violence and skill. To her, he was simply Sir Manny, a kind but distant figure of absolute authority. Why was he personally escorting her? Usually, if there was a problem with the household staff, a broken vase, a shirt ironed incorrectly, a meal served late, the head housekeeper, or his wife, Jinky, would handle it. For the senator himself to intervene, to call her out personally, it meant something serious. It meant, in her terrified mind, the end. She thought of her children back in the province. She thought of the school fees that were due next week, the ones she had already promised to send. She thought of the medicine her elderly mother needed for her hypertension. If she lost this job, the fragile ecosystem of her family's survival would collapse instantly. The shame of returning home empty-handed, of telling her kids that she had failed, weighed on her chest like a stone. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, hot and stinging, not from gratitude yet, but from sheer, paralyzing terror. She wiped them away quickly with the back of her rough hand. She couldn't let the champ see her cry over a dismissal. She had to be strong. She had to accept her fate with the dignity that poverty teaches you to wear like armor. They reached the sprawling driveway. It was less of a driveway and more of a private car showroom. Massive SUVs, sleek sports cars, vehicles that cost more than her entire village could earn in a lifetime, glistened under the tropical sun like metal beasts. The chrome reflected the blinding light, forcing her to squint. Manny stopped. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the collection of machinery. The silence was agonizing. Around them, the usual chaos of the Pacquiao household seemed to have paused. The entourage, the bodyguards with their dark glasses, the trainers, the cousins, the hangers-on, who are always present in the orbit of a superstar, were standing around the perimeter. They weren't talking. They were watching. Their eyes were fixed on her. This terrified Doris even more. Was this to be a public scolding? An example made for the others? Manny turned around slowly. His face was unreadable at first, that famous poker face he used during stare-downs at weigh-ins before a mega-fight. But then, the corners of his eyes crinkled. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of anticipation. He gestured with his hand, pointing not at the gate, but towards a specific spot in the lineup of vehicles. There, sitting parked and gleaming, was a brand new car. It wasn't a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. Those were toys for the rich. This was a practical, sturdy, beautiful gray sedan, a car built for families, for travel, for safety. It still had the big red ribbon tied across the hood, the universal symbol of a gift. Doris looked at the car. She looked at Manny. Her brain couldn't make the connection. She thought perhaps he wanted her to clean it, or maybe he wanted her to fetch something from inside it. It simply did not compute that this object, this symbol of supreme status and wealth, could have anything to do with her. She stood frozen, wringing her hands in her apron, waiting for the order. "Sir?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Do you want me to wash it, sir?" Manny laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that broke the tension in the air. He shook his head, stepped closer to her, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a set of keys. The silver metal caught the sunlight. He held them out, dangling them in the air between them. "No, Doris," Manny said, his voice soft but loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't want you to wash it. I want you to drive it. It's yours." For a few seconds, the world went silent around Doris. The roar of the distant traffic, the rustle of the palm trees, the murmurs of the bodyguards, everything faded into a white noise of absolute disbelief. Her brain refused to process the information. In the hierarchy of her world, housemaids did not get cars. Housemaids got hand-me-down clothes, leftovers, and, if they were lucky, a Christmas bonus. Cars were for the masters, for the politicians, for the stars. To be given a vehicle, a machine that cost hundreds of thousands of pesos, was not just generous. It was a disruption of the natural order. She looked at the keys dangling from Manny's hand as if they were a foreign object, a hallucination brought on by the heat. Her hands, calloused and rough, remained clasped tightly against her chest, as if she were afraid to reach out and break the illusion. "Sir," she stammered again, tears now spilling over her eyelids, tracking lines through the dust on her cheeks. I cannot pay for this. I have no money for this." Manny stepped forward, closing the distance. He took her hand, gently prying her fingers open, and pressed the cold metal of the keys into her palm. "You don't pay, Doris. It's paid for. It's a gift. For you, for your family." The moment the keys touched her skin, the dam broke. Doris didn't just cry, she collapsed. Her knees buckled under the weight of a lifetime of struggle, and she would have hit the pavement if Manny hadn't steadied her by the arm. A guttural sob ripped from her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated release. It was the sound of 20 years of waking up at 4 a.m. It was the sound of riding in the back of jeepneys, inhaling exhaust fumes for hours just to get to work. It was the sound of missing her children's birthdays because she had to work to feed them. It was the sound of every sacrifice she had ever made, suddenly being recognized and validated by the greatest man she knew. She covered her face with her hands, the keys clutched so tightly they bit into her flesh, and wept uncontrollably. She shook with the force of her emotion, her small frame racking with sobs that echoed off the walls of the mansion. The entourage, usually stone-faced men trained to kill or protect, softened. Some looked away, clearing their throats. Others pulled out their phones to capture the moment, not for social media clout, but because the raw humanity of it was impossible to ignore. Manny didn't step back. He didn't look awkward. He stood there with a gentle smile, patting her shoulder, letting her cry. He understood this cry. He remembered the nights he cried from hunger in the streets of Manila. He knew that poverty leaves a scar on the soul that never fully heals, and that sudden kindness can sometimes hurt more than cruelty, because it reminds you of how hard you've been fighting. "Stop crying now," Manny said softly, in their native tongue, his voice thick with emotion. "You deserve this. You work hard. You take care of us. Now let us take care of you." He guided her toward the car. It was a silver sedan, practical, reliable, and brand new. To a billionaire, it was a drop in the ocean. To Doris, it was a spaceship. It was freedom. It meant she could visit her children without a 6-hour commute. It meant she could go to the market without carrying heavy bags in the rain. It meant safety. Manny opened the driver's door. The smell of the new interior, that mix of plastic, fabric, and adhesive, wafted out. To most, it's just a new car smell. To Doris, it was the scent of dignity. "Sit," Manny commanded gently. Doris hesitated. She looked at her dirty apron, her slippers. She felt unworthy to sit on the pristine seats. "Sir, I am dirty. I will stain it." "It's your car, Doris," Manny laughed, practically pushing her into the seat. "Stain it if you want. It's yours." She sat down. Her hands gripped the steering wheel. She looked at the dashboard, at the zeros on the odometer. She looked out the windshield and saw Manny Pacquiao, the 8-division world champion, giving her a thumbs up. The absurdity and the beauty of the moment washed over her again, and a fresh wave of tears came. But these were different. These weren't tears of shock. They were tears of joy. She realized this wasn't a dream. The keys were real. The car was real. Her life had just shifted on its axis. Manny turned to the camera that was recording. He wasn't boasting. His face was serious, reflective. He spoke not just to Doris, but to everyone watching, to every wealthy person who hoarded their blessings. "We must be grateful," he said. "God gave us blessings not to keep, but to share. These people, they help us live our lives. We must help them live theirs." It was a sermon without a pulpit, delivered in a driveway. He explained that he saw her suffering, he saw her exhaustion, and he couldn't sit in his luxury while she suffered in transit. It was a matter of basic human empathy, amplified by his immense resources. But the story didn't end with just the handover. The practical reality of the gift began to set in. Doris didn't just get a car, she got a new status. In a society strictly divided by class, the housemaid now owned a vehicle better than many office workers. The other staff members gathered around, cheering, clapping. There was no jealousy, only a collective sense of victory. If one of them could be lifted up, maybe there was hope for all of them. Manny stood back, letting Doris have her moment. He watched her touch the dashboard, watched her adjust the mirror, watched her realize that she didn't have to walk to the jeepney stop ever again. He saw the burden lift from her shoulders, physically and metaphorically. However, Manny knew that a car in the Philippines is also a responsibility. Gas, maintenance, insurance, these are things that can drown a minimum wage earner. So, in true Pacquiao fashion, the generosity didn't stop at the metal and rubber. He leaned in the window as she sat there, overwhelmed. "Don't worry about the gas," he whispered. "Don't worry about the maintenance. We will handle it. You just drive. You just be happy." Doris looked at him, her eyes swollen, her face streaked with tears and snot, looking anything but composed, yet radiating a beauty that comes from pure gratitude. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir," she repeated like a mantra, unable to find any other words that could encompass the magnitude of her feelings. She started the engine. The purr of the motor was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of a promise kept, a prayer answered. Manny stepped back, joining his wife Jinky, who was watching with a smile. They weren't just employers giving a bonus. They were people changing a life. The car was just a vessel. The real gift was the message: you matter. You are seen. You are not a machine that cleans our house. You are a part of our family. And as Doris sat there, gripping the wheel of her future, the weeping finally began to subside, replaced by a look of fierce determination. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a woman with a car, a woman with a champion in her corner. The engine purred, a soft mechanical lullaby that promised a new beginning. But the transition from shock to reality wasn't immediate. Doris sat in the driver's seat, her hands still trembling on the wheel, afraid to put the car in gear. It was one thing to be given the keys. It was another to navigate the chaotic, unforgiving streets of General Santos City in a vehicle that shone like a diamond amidst the dust. Manny, sensing her hesitation, tapped the roof of the car, a signal of encouragement, a boxer's tap on the glove. "Go on," he mouthed. "Go home." As Doris eased the car out of the massive iron gates of the Pacquiao estate, the contrast between her two worlds collided violently. Inside the gates was a paradise of order and wealth. Outside was the raw, pulsing heat of the Philippines. Tricycles buzzed like angry hornets, jeepneys belched black smoke, and pedestrians weaved through traffic with a death wish. Usually Doris was one of those pedestrians, choking on fumes, sweating in the heat, praying for a ride. Today, she was sealed inside a bubble of cool, conditioned air. The silence inside the cabin was deafening. She turned on the radio, and a local ballad filled the space. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving the journey, she was experiencing it. She looked in the rearview mirror and didn't see a servant. She saw a driver, a owner, a woman in control. The drive to her neighborhood was a blur of emotions. She kept checking the speedometer, terrified of scratching the paint, terrified that she would wake up and be back on a crowded bus. When she finally turned onto the narrow, unpaved road that led to her humble home, the car looked like a spaceship landing on a different planet. The dust kicked up by the tires coated the shiny silver bumper, but she didn't care. She honked the horn, not aggressive, but joyous. A long, sustained beep that announced her arrival. Her children, hearing the unfamiliar sound of a new car engine, ran out of the small concrete house. They stopped dead in their tracks. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains and fences. In a neighborhood where owning a motorcycle was a luxury, a brand new sedan was a spectacle. Doris opened the door and stepped out. She wasn't wearing fine clothes. She was still in her work uniform, her apron tucked into her pocket, but she stood taller than she ever had. "Mama?" her eldest son asked, his eyes wide, looking from the car to his mother. Is Is Sir Manny visiting? Doris shook her head, a fresh tear escaping. She dangled the keys just as Manny had done for her. No, Anak, son. Sir Manny isn't visiting. This is ours. The scream of joy that erupted from her children was a sound that money cannot buy. They rushed her, not the car. They hugged their mother, burying their faces in her uniform, smelling the scent of the mansion and the sweat of her hard work. Then, tentatively, they touched the car. They ran their hands over the smooth metal, looked at their reflections in the glass. For them, this wasn't just transportation. It was a promise that their mother wouldn't be so tired anymore. It was a promise that if an emergency happened at night, they wouldn't have to beg neighbors for help. It was security. Doris watched them, and in that moment, the weight of the years of servitude, the backaches, the missed holidays, all of it felt light as a feather. The sacrifice had yielded a harvest she never expected. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere was reflective. Manny sat on the porch, watching the empty spot where the car used to be. Reporters who had caught wind of the story asked him why. Why give a car? Why not just cash? Why go to such lengths for a housemaid? Manny looked at his hands. Hands that had been wrapped in tape and leather for decades. Hands that had beaten the best fighters in history. You know, he said, his voice quiet and serious. I remember when I had nothing. I remember sleeping on a cardboard box. I remember looking at cars passing by and thinking, I will never have that. I know the pain of walking miles because you have no fare. He paused, looking out at the sprawling city. God blessed me. He gave me these fists, this talent. But if I close my hand and keep everything for myself, I am not a champion. I am just a rich man. A champion fights for others. Today, I didn't fight in the ring. I fought against her struggle. And I think I won. This act of kindness sent ripples through the community. It wasn't just about the car. It was about the message it sent to every person working in the service industry in the Philippines. It validated their existence. It showed that loyalty and hard work could be recognized. Other staff members in the Pacquiao household didn't feel resentment. They felt hope. They worked with renewed vigor, knowing their boss was a man who saw them. But the story holds a deeper layer. It wasn't just a gift. It was an investment in dignity. Manny knew that by giving Doris a car, he was giving her back her time. The hours she saved commuting were hours she could spend sleeping or being with her children. He was giving her health. He was giving her peace of mind. He understood that poverty is often a thief of time and energy, and with a set of keys, he had arrested that thief. As night fell, Doris sat in her new car, parked in front of her small house. She wasn't driving anywhere. She just sat there, in the dark, listening to the silence protected by the metal and glass. She offered a prayer of thanks, not just for the machine but for the man who gave it. She realized then that Manny Pacquiao wasn't a giant because he conquered the world of boxing. He was a giant because he never forgot the world he came from. The sun rose over General Santos City the next morning, casting long shadows over the dusty streets. But for Doris, the world looked different through the windshield of her own car. The routine that had once been a grueling test of endurance, waking up in the dark, rushing to catch a jeepney, fighting for space, inhaling smoke, was gone. In its place was a quiet, almost sacred drive. She buckled her children into the back seat to drop them off at school. For years they had walked, their shoes getting muddy when it rained, their uniforms dusty when it was dry. Today they arrived like royalty. Doris watched in the rearview mirror as her youngest son ran his hand over the fabric of the seat, his eyes wide with a mixture of pride and disbelief. When she pulled up to the school gate, other parents turned to look. They knew Doris. They knew she was a maid. But as she stepped out of that silver sedan, head held high, the social stigma that usually clung to her profession seemed to evaporate. She wasn't just the help anymore. She was a woman who had been blessed, a woman who was valued. Driving back to the Pacquiao mansion for work felt surreal. As she approached the massive gates, usually she would have to wave from the pedestrian side, waiting for a guard to buzz her in. Today she flashed her headlights. The heavy iron gates swung open automatically. The security guards, men who carried shotguns and usually offered a polite but distant nod, now saluted her with genuine smiles. "Nice ride, ma'am Doris," one shouted. That simple title, ma'am, was a small revolution in itself. The car had bridged a gap that years of hard labor couldn't. It commanded respect in a society obsessed with status. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was electric. The video of the handover had begun to circulate online. It wasn't just a local story anymore. It was going global. People from all over the world were watching the fierce gladiator, the man who broke bones for a living, break down in tears of happiness alongside his housekeeper. Comments poured in from the US, from Europe, from Africa. People weren't talking about his left hook or his footwork. They were talking about his heart. "This is what a real champion looks like," one comment read. He didn't forget where he came from. Manny, however, seemed unfazed by the internet fame. He was in the gym, wrapping his hands for training, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of his fists hitting the heavy bag echoing through the estate. Doris found him there during a break. She wanted to thank him again, properly, without the tears and the shock of yesterday. She stood by the ring ropes waiting for him to finish his set. When the bell rang, Manny stopped, sweat pouring down his face, his chest heaving. He saw her and immediately smiled, that boyish grin that charmed the world. "How was the drive?" he asked, wiping his face with a towel. "Did the aircon work? Is it cold enough?" "It is perfect, sir," Doris replied, clutching her hands together. "My children, they felt like princes and princesses today. They told me to tell you thank you. They are praying for you." Manny leaned against the ropes, looking serious again. "That is the best payment, Doris. Prayers. I need them more than money." He gestured for her to come closer. "You know, people think I give these things because I have too much money. But that is not it. I give because I know how much it hurts to have nothing. I look at you and I remember my mother. She struggled too. She cried too. When I help you, I feel like I'm helping her in the past." This revelation struck Doris hard. She realized that Manny wasn't just being kind. He was healing his own trauma through generosity. Every act of giving was a punch thrown against the poverty that had once tried to kill him. He was fighting a ghost, and he was winning by lifting others up. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, "I will work even harder. I will take care of this house like it is my own." Manny shook his head. "No, you work enough. You just do your job, but now do it with a lighter heart. That is all I ask." As the day went on, the impact of the gift continued to ripple outward. It challenged the other wealthy families in the neighborhood. It started conversations about how domestic workers were treated in the Philippines. Manny Pacquiao had inadvertently set a new standard. He showed that you don't lose power by empowering those who serve you. You gain loyalty, you gain love, and you gain a legacy that outlasts any championship belt. Later that afternoon, a group of reporters gathered outside the gates, hoping for a quote. Manny went out, not to brag, but to redirect the attention. He stood there, small in stature, but a giant in presence. "Why are you surprised?" he asked the cameras. "We are all the same. We all bleed. We all hunger. Just because I sit at the head of the table and she cleans it, does not mean I am better. It just means I was blessed with a different path. And if you have a car, and your neighbor has to walk in the rain, and you do not offer a ride, then who are you? What is the point of your success?" Back in the kitchen, Doris was preparing dinner, but something had changed. The heaviness in her movements was gone. She chopped vegetables with a rhythm. She hummed a tune. She looked out the window at her car parked in the staff lot, shining under the security lights. It wasn't just a machine of metal and glass. It was a tangible proof that miracles happen, that good men exist, and that even a housemaid in the shadow of a legend could be the protagonist of her own story. She wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. She was working for a family that had proven, in the most spectacular way, that they considered her family too.